Well, I'm joined now by Mark Williams-Thomas, the former detective behind the documentary which first exposed the allegations against Jimmy Savile last year, and also by the former Health Minister Edwina Currie, who appointed Jimmy Savile head of a task force at Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital in 1988, where it is claimed he abused a vulnerable patient. Edwina Currie, let's start with where the police left off there, which is that how the nation was hoodwinked, if you like. You were one of the people who was hoodwinked by him.
Oh, I think we were all hoodwinked by him, and indeed we were all groomed by him. Even this time last year, if you'd said that Jimmy Savile was a predatory paedophile, I think most people in the country wouldn't have believed it. I didn't put him in charge of Broadmoor, but the way he operated there was to act as if he was, and he behaved in such a fashion that he was able to gain access to vulnerable people. That's what he did. He chose his victims with the greatest possible care. He chose people whose word would not be believed, particularly if pitched against his own.
But how, I mean, OK, maybe you didn't officially put him in charge, but you knew he was very influential. You knew he was heading up this task force, and you signed that off. I mean, even somebody who knew a lot about Broadmoor Hospital, he wasn't qualified, he wasn't a hospital administrator, he wasn't medical. Why did you find yourself signing this off?
Well, that was also true of Princess Diana, that was true of Lord Longford. It's true of a lot of those people who, for very good reasons usually, want to be hospital visitors, to befriend patients, to try and look after their welfare. And Savile slotted himself into that kind of environment extremely effectively. He was a very, very effective con man.
But neither Diana nor Longford were ever put in charge of a hospital effectively, were they?
Yeah, well, he was not put in charge of the hospital. I've now corrected you on that more than once. The person in charge was actually a senior civil servant during an interim between one set of management who he had not been satisfied with, and a new set of management who were yet to be appointed. But he knew everybody in the hospital. He was able to, I think, sometimes quietly blackmail anyone who would have caused him any grief at that sort of level, somebody at a ward level or a nurse level who might have tried to remonstrate with him. And he put himself in a position of power extremely effectively.
And you know that he was blackmailing them, or could blackmail them, because he told you, effectively, that he knew that they, he thought they were up to certain things?
Well, looking back on it now, the effect is chilling. At the time, I wondered quite what he was up to. But he had access to payroll, he had access to the rent roll, because more than 90 properties were on the Broadmoor estate, for example, mostly with our staff in there. And he was able to judge who was paying the rent, who wasn't paying the rent, who was fiddling the overtime, and so on. He was able, therefore, to challenge anybody, just about, who could challenge him. And that meant he had put himself in a position over many, many years, more than 20 years before I got on the scene, to have his own way. And that's exactly what he did.
Let me just bring in Mark Williams-Thomas. I mean, does this chime with what other people who were hoodwinked by him say?
Yeah, I mean, this is a man who was a great manipulator. He'd created an environment around him which gave him access to every element of society, from the royal family to a number of prime ministers, to every charity. And indeed, we know his access to schools, to hospitals. He was very specific in who he chose as far as his victims go. But as Edwina says, this was a man who put himself in a situation where he gained an amount of trust. And the problem is people didn't challenge him on that. And to a degree, we've seen that now with regards to the police and the way the CPS looked at this, is that this was a man who was effectively believed in what he said. We now know he was a predatory paedophile who was abusing children over 60 years.
And that's the most surprising thing, isn't it? That after the events came out, after your first expose came out, everybody said, well, he was always creepy, he was always weird, we always knew there was something odd about him. And yet at the time, they treated him with great credibility and they believed what he said. Mark Williams-Thomas.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, let me be very clear. Putting this programme together was not an easy task. We had to keep it very quiet. We weren't allowed to let it to get out to other people, because we knew that if it got out to other people, he was going to have huge support. And indeed, right up until days of broadcast, I was hugely being criticised. How dare you expose this man when he is dead, when he hasn't got the opportunity to defend himself? I was very clear that we needed to set out into the public so that people were fully aware of the nature of his offending, and that is what we've done.
And how
we're now in
shocked
a
are
position...
you? Sorry to interrupt. It's just how shocked are you that this was still going on at the BBC up until 2006? It's alleged, and in other instances as recently as 2009.
Well, let me tell you two things that have shocked me from the report. Firstly, in 1960, a young boy aged 10 approached Savile outside a hotel and asked him for an autograph. Savile took him inside and abused him. And in 2006, on the last broadcast of Top of the Pops, when Savile was 79 years old, he abused a teenage girl. That is quite shocking. The totality of his offending, which we will never know. But what we will know, and what we do now know, is timeline. But the question is here. 2009, police did an investigation. The CPS failed in that investigation. They were aware of the allegations. They did not give the advice for him to be interviewed. Indeed, they said no further action without even the allegations being put to him. What are we going to do moving forward? How many times have we heard lessons must be learned? Well, in 2009, we were still failing people, and we're still failing people to a degree now. We've certainly seen that with regards to Rotherham. I think we need to have a radical rethink. Is it about time that we started looking at those people who allowed him to be in those positions of trust? And furthermore, is it about time that we have started to bring in those people who failed in their duty to allow him to continue?
And what more do we need to know from the BBC? I suppose we need to, because they've claimed that their child protection procedures have all changed, yet this was happening in 2006.
Well, we saw with our programme, obviously we asked prior to broadcast our programme whether they'd had any allegations. They said no, they weren't aware of anything. We're obviously now aware that there was some concerns within the BBC and there was some information known. I think the problem is now we've also got 14 separate reviews and investigations undertaken. Who is going to pull all this information together and tell us the truth with regards to Savile without any fear of anybody coming along and saying, well, you're picking on us, you're having a go at us? I think we need to be very clear that there needs to be somebody to come out to say this is really what happened.
Just finally, Edwina Curry, I mean, now that you've been able to reflect on this and read the report, I mean, do you look back on that decision to even be meeting a man who was basically a TV celebrity and a radio DJ and take him seriously within the health service and think, what was I doing?
I wish we had heard some of what we now know. I really wish, because we could have stopped him. We could certainly have stopped him as far as our access to our hospitals was concerned. It would have caused a huge row, but we would have stopped him, and I only wish that that had happened.
Edwina Curry, Mark Williams-Thomas, thank you both.